to tell a female that they can't have an increase in muscle mass does not mean that they can't have a major increase in strength. And so I want to make sure that that's clear to all the listeners, that strength is more than just mass. And at the same time, females will gain some mass. It just won't be as dramatic as the male athlete that's doing, similar types of training.
Hello and welcome to the Ninja Babes podcast. I am excited today to be with Dr. Jeffrey Timmer from Keene State College. He is an associate professor of exercise science. So we're asking him all the questions today. I'm really excited to have him on. Mary Layton and I had spoken with him earlier and picked his brain about a million things having to do with just the physiological differences or similarities between men and women athletes, and what does it look like to train well? What are the differences that sometimes we overlook when it comes to building our ninja courses, and just really understanding the broader picture of the differences in gender. And so I'm excited to have you on today. Thank you so much for being with us. I know you wanted to give a big old shout out to the University of Pittsburgh because that is where you got your PhD in exercise physiology. So woohoo.
Yes, that's true. I'm excited to be here. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. I'm stoked. And you're only one of, I guess now you're the fourth male to be on the Ninja Babes podcast, because originally all of my interviews were just with women athletes from the show, from American Ninja Warrior. So
nice.
Yeah. So it's great to have you.
I feel like I'm in the top 5. I feel very good about that.
Yeah, top 5 for sure. All right. Well, so you and I and Mary had spoken at length about so many interesting topics and questions that we've had. And for everyone who's been listening to the podcast, they know that for a few months now, we've been just exploring different aspects of sports training. What does it look like to train specifically for a Ninja Warrior? And looking at the differences between men and women and how we perform on the course. And, there's a few different topics we'll get into today, but as many of my listeners know, we're often just trying to brainstorm and imagine if there is a better way that we can compete. And so meaning, we always compete same gender on the same course, sometimes with the same podium or sometimes with separate podiums. And there's been, some feelings of there's got to be a better way to do this. Like maybe we can just have separate courses for females, or maybe we shouldn't, or, it's a big conversation, but there's different aspects of that conversation that we're going to get to today. And I'm excited to hear your perspective. So
sounds good.
Yeah. So I'm just going to dive in with the first question. It's often been said that women have more lower body strength than men do. And is that true? I feel like that's probably a myth. But I think when you look at women historically, or just kind of culturally in recent history, I feel like perhaps women even just train their lower bodies more than their upper bodies. So is it something that women inherently have more lower body strength, or is it just something that we focus on in training?
So the first thing is to make sure, we're talking about the same thing. If you're just talking about just strength by itself, obviously, if you look at powerlifting numbers and anything like that, the men have greater strength. But when you start looking at strength to weight ratio, that's where things get very close for lower body. So women, like you said, typically have worked out lower body probably more than upper body, which we'll get to, in a second. But the other thing is that when you do a squat, your leg length does make a difference. And that's whether you're a male or a female. It just tends that, females might have slightly shorter legs. And because of that, you have a little advantage of a shorter lever. And I know we've talked about that before, but the longer the lever, the more force you have to generate to move that object. And so, even in a squat or a leg press or anything like that, when the weight is at the end of your lever, it requires more force. And so, those, whether men or women, who have shorter legs probably do substantially better on the squat than somebody who's taller, versus maybe a deadlift, which is a little bit easier for somebody who's taller or greater leg length. Women, it's all about strength to weight ratio. And can you maximize that to get very close to a male physiologically in terms of that ratio? That's what's going to help you perform.
So are you saying that typically males have a greater strength to weight ratio for their specific body?
Typically that's true. And that simply has to do with, women typically carry a little more percent fat due to childbearing reasons. And because of that, the muscle mass to excess fat ratio is just a little different. And that's just physiological based on, childbirth. And so to reduce that and to cut that gap between the strength to weight ratio, it can be done, but it takes a lot of work for both male and female, but probably specifically more female.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I know in Ninja, just from my own experience, it always feels better when if I'm doing lache or doing anything where I'm hanging, in a way, like I want my body to be lighter so that I can do those movements easier. But at the same time, then is it really the point of getting lighter? Is it the fact that I want to maximize my strength? But then it's also, women, I know we tend to have we do have a greater percentage of body fat compared to males. And so if you're just thinking of like the best way to maximize strength on the course in Ninja, where you're often carrying your full weight of your body as you climb through, laches or climbing, anything that's hanging, it's like you're carrying your full body weight. So I would imagine that then in a sport like Ninja, like you're really maximizing that potential is one of the best things that we could do as an athlete.
Oh, for sure. It requires a very unique set of strength and skill to participate in Ninja courses. And so I really enjoy watching it because it does push athletes to something that's completely different than what we've seen before. And, as the sport has grown, more women are getting involved than ever. And I think you see how they've reduced the gap, so to speak, that they're training more specifically to increase that strength to weight ratio. And going back to that first question, like upper body strength wise, I just think culturally and historically, women haven't worked on upper body strength as much as men. Now, you can argue that, where that comes from and, the nature of the weight room and all of those different gender differences, that some people would call stereotypical, but they do come from a cultural difference. And I think that is changing. I think in the last 10 years, you've really seen more females focusing on whole body strength, including upper body, probably more so than they ever have.
Yeah, I would agree, most definitely. And I think you're right. It's that shift in just mindset and perspective of even just the fact of, what is beautiful or what is acceptable or what is what makes you feel good, what makes you feel empowered. I've shared this story on the podcast before, but for me personally, I, in high school and college, struggled with disordered eating and eating as little as I could to just maintain like a specific image. But that I also played sports and that wasn't very conducive to playing sports. And so then later on, after college, I started strength training, and it was the first time in my life that I would see like the numbers on the scale going up. But I had that realization of, wow, I'm not getting fat, I'm getting stronger. And like, that actually feels really good. And that's actually something I'm proud of. And so then coming into Ninja for me, that was a total mind shift of just like, wow, I'm stronger and I'm like the heaviest I've ever been, but I'm amazing. Like what I'm doing is amazing. So.
Yeah. I don't think you're the only one. I think it's been a great cultural shift in terms of strength being an important part of not only males, but also now females, and not only female athletes, but really females in general. And so I think it is an important shift, and I hope it continues.
Absolutely. So something though is, women can continue to develop their strength, especially when we're talking about upper body, and something that still I feel like a lot of girls or women just haven't maybe been encouraged to work on their pull-up strength or work on upper body strength, because maybe they're in their family or in their community, it's still kind of looked down upon for women to have muscular arms. But girls can continue to work on their upper body strength. So I'm wondering, I know we'll get into this more as well. We can talk more about kind of what happens in puberty and all that and how bodies begin to change. But I'm wondering, for girls and women then, what is their potential to gain strength? Are they limited in their upper body strength capabilities? That's kind of really like the bigger question that I want to get to. But I guess just to start with number 2 on our list here, like what types of changes do you see a female athlete go through when they hit puberty? And then does that affect their athletic performance?
Yeah. So, a very good question. It's very interesting, right? If you watch boys and girls that are pre-puberty, they almost physically are very similar, move similar, speed is similar, strength is similar. And so, that's probably the time where there really is no difference. But as puberty hits, those are when we have changes in hormones, and men increase testosterone and women increase estrogen. Women also have a small increase in testosterone, but ultimately, that is a fundamental difference, is testosterone versus estrogen. And so testosterone is a muscle builder. And so for men, they probably are going to add muscle mass on puberty. Sometimes, irregardless of, how much physical activity they do. In women, the estrogen is going to promote a little bit of fat storage to prepare for the childbirth process. And so, you see a larger separation where, females, their minimum percent fat for normal functioning is around 12%. And that's extremely low for a female. And then you can see males where essential fat is all the way down to 3%. And that's just simply a difference in, females need that fat in order to give birth to a healthy child. And so, those differences can be quite wide in terms of percent body fat. Because of that, is it a disadvantage? I don't ever, want to say too bad that it's a disadvantage, but it definitely does make a difference for the female ninja athlete, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you think about just those numbers, is like plain fact, the 3% and 12%, I believe you said, for minimum body fat. It's just crazy because it seems like a really big difference between men and women. But yeah, it's like your body, the women's body needs to have that fat in order to do, all the functions of like growing a child and all these things. Like we talk about this actually in another podcast episode that's coming up. I talk with a hormone specialist, and she was describing to me about how, so many athletes who are girls, who are teenagers, or even like young adults training really hard, they can lose their period, and losing that ability, maybe you're not trying to get pregnant at that time and you might not think anything of it, but your body's actually showing you that there's clear signs if something is wrong. So
yeah. And that is important for all female athletes. Once you get around that percent fat and you start losing menstrual cycle, you want to be sure that you don't stay in that position for a long period of time. It can be detrimental for many reasons, and not just childbirth, but just hormonally. It does throw things off quite a bit for that female, and it would be the same for a male to get if they got below 3%. But that's really difficult to get below 3%. The other part of your question was about muscle mass, and so I'm sorry, I want to retreat back to that.
Go for it.
Females, I challenge my class all the time. Females, when you go in the weight room, I promise you that you'll get so much stronger. Strength will increase dramatically, just as dramatically as a male. However, you won't see the same percentage increase in muscle mass because of that lack of testosterone. There are many other ways that we gain strength. There's a lot of neural pathways that change and a lot of changes that occur that we can increase strength without an increase in muscle mass. And so, to tell a female that they can't have an increase in muscle mass does not mean that they can't have a major increase in strength. And so I wanted to make sure that that's clear to all the listeners, that strength is more than just mass. And at the same time, females will gain some mass. It just won't be as dramatic as the male athlete that's doing, similar types of training.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never heard it put quite that way. When you say that, are you referring more so to like optimizing muscle movements and like the repetition of movement, being able to do something more optimally, or is it like a different type of strength than that? If we're not talking about mass, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's obviously some efficiency with the movement. But, without getting too technical, there are things that change neurologically. So you activate basically the muscles that are doing more of the work better versus the muscles that oppose the work. So, for instance, if you do a bicep curl, your triceps actually initially, they're contracting slightly to prevent you from injuring yourself. And so the more you do bicep curls, the less activation of the triceps you get so that you can actually lift more and more and more and more because your body is accustomed to it. It's not trying to protect it as well. And so there's many other aspects like that causes an increase in strength when you go to the weight room on a regular basis. And so all males, all females have that physiological capability to increase strength. Even kids do. Even kids, 8 years old, they can go to the weight room and see gains in strength. Even though at 8 years old, they don't have the hormones to build muscle mass, they're still going to see a really large increase in strength because of those neurological changes that are kind of allowing you to lift more and still keep you safe.
It's so interesting. Okay, so this spawned two questions in my mind.
Okay.
The first one, when you're talking about, other muscles that might be activated to help like prevent injury when you're first learning like a new movement or a new skill like that, would that be similar to what we say of like, your body was, if you're doing a movement and your body was compensating or more so like guarding against a different part of your body that does have an injury or that's weaker, where kind of like your muscle groups like compensate for one another? Is that similar to what you're talking about?
It's not quite similar. So like if you have an injury or you're compensating, like a lot of movements require more than one muscle group to activate. And so when you compensate, what happens is that one of the muscles that are responsible for doing that movement, if it's attached to an injury, the other muscles that are responsible for that movement will try to take over, to keep them okay. What I'm talking about is literally like we have muscles that oppose each other. And when they oppose each other, they're just trying to make sure that you don't lift too much. And the easiest example is the biceps and the triceps. But in your case, the biceps and the brachioradialis, they're responsible, and the brachialis are responsible for that bicep curl. And so if you have let's say a bicep tendon that is giving you problems, the brachialis and the brachioradialis will try to do more of the work to compensate. Whereas initially when you go to the weight room, the tricep is trying to prevent all movement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. That does make sense. Interesting.
Yeah. So it is slightly different than the compensation piece.
Right.
Yeah.
So the other question I had is that there's something that we talk a lot about at ninja gyms, and I never know if this is a myth or if this is true. But in ninja, I know you've watched the show, so there's a lot of hanging that happens from bars, and often in the ninja gym for like challenges or just like who can do the longest, like we'll all get on a bar, like a regular 2-inch bar or whatever it is in the gym, and just dead hang. So just hang there and see how long you can go. And, some people are squirming after a minute. Other people can do it like 5 or 10 minutes. I was with a friend once, Hunter Gerard, he knows who he is. He did a hang it was about 40 minutes, I think. I could be wrong on the time, but it was like close to 40 minutes. And I remember being like shocked. But then there were other kids at his gym who were going for like these outstanding times, much longer than any of the adults. And I think I'd have to check who it was, but I know there was a kid somewhere rumored at some gym that hung for like an hour straight. And so people say though, oh, it's because the kids, like their muscles don't build up lactic acid the way that adults' muscles do. And I don't know if that's true or what does that even mean then, as far as like, do they not feel like the burning sensation? So that was my question.
Yeah, that is an interesting question. Children do have many physiological differences compared to adults. They do produce lactic acid. So, whether it's at the same rate or not, in fact, there's some argument that they would produce more because they're kind of inefficient creatures by nature in terms of energy use, and they're not great fat burners, which means that you use more glucose that would produce more lactic acid. So I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure that that wouldn't be the case, that they produce less lactic acid. I think the child's biggest advantage is that if you have an active child, their body weight, again, their strength to weight ratio is, through the roof. Children can do crazy things because if they're physically active at all, their strength is so far greater than their actual body weight that they have an extreme advantage. Not only that, but again, you're talking levers. Children are smaller. The smaller levers, they have to produce less force. So, it wouldn't necessarily surprise me that, a child could hang it. I mean, it'd be pretty impressive. It means they're doing a lot of hanging, on the side. It's not like you can just put a kid up there and, and hang the first time. But they have a couple of physiological advantages, strength to weight ratio and smaller levers, that could easily allow a child, to perform equally, or in this case, maybe even better than an adult. If you're a nice strong kid and you only weigh 65, 70 pounds, that's a huge advantage over the male adult that weighs 175, right? I mean, the amount of force you have to generate is so far less.
Yeah.
No, that's to their advantage.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, these are kids who their coaches have them practice hanging like every class probably.
Right.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad I could debunk that myth for the whole ninja world out there. It's literally something that's come up so many times.
Right.
Well, so kind of getting back to where we're in our conversation for that tangent. Something that I've been wondering now with the differences between men and women sorry, let me say that again. One of the questions I've been wondering about before we had alluded to, like, are the differences between women and men, are they disadvantages for women? And no, we don't really want to call them disadvantages, but they are differences. And so something that had come up earlier when you and I and Mary were talking was talking about some of these examples of how on the course, sometimes it seems like courses are more so built for like a specific body size. But there's ninjas who are smaller who will encounter the same obstacles, even though they might seem a lot more challenging for that individual because of their body size. And so I was wondering if we could just talk about that for a bit. And the example actually that you had brought up was about Casey Catanzaro on the spider climb. So why don't we just start there? If you want to just recap what you noticed when you watched the show and kind of what your thoughts are with those differences in size.
Yeah, so one of the things when I watch American Ninja Warrior is some of the disadvantages on different body types. And so what you have is you don't have many really tall ninjas, and you don't have too many really small or short ninjas that make it a long ways. Now, you could argue lots of things in terms of, strength and grip strength and all those. But Casey, when she did the spider climb, to me, that was the most obvious, kind of disadvantage. And not for a woman necessarily, but for a person who's shorter in stature with a very limited wingspan. When she jumped to the spider climb, literally her wingspan couldn't touch the walls, and she was almost in the full splits with her legs, which barely touched the wall, and her hands literally couldn't touch the wall. And so it wasn't a matter of Casey's strength. It wasn't a matter of her technique. It wasn't a matter of anything other than there was absolutely no way that she was going to be able to do the spider climb, just simply because of the way it was set up. Some people argued, well, she should have got a better jump on the trampoline. But the trampoline is based on weight and how much you can, push the trampoline down to get a further jump, so to speak, because the people said if she went like, I forget what it was, like a foot and a half further, the wall is much closer together. Well, it's almost impossible for her to go another foot and a half further simply because she cannot push down the trampoline far enough to make it rebound in a way to allow her to get a foot and a half deeper. And so that was one really extreme instance where it was really almost an impossibility for her to complete that task. And those are the tasks that I don't, I think that those are the ones that really provide a disadvantage. The other one I talked to you about before is the door swing, and how some people, when they get to the last door, they can easily reach out and grab the door, and, really span the gap between the two doors using, just their anatomical frame. Whereas I've seen somebody who couldn't reach the door. They literally couldn't stay on one door and reach the next door. And so they literally had to try to jump from one of the doors to the last door. And that seemed like a complete disadvantage for that person who just literally couldn't reach the third door to try to span the gap. So, a couple of those instances where that anatomical disadvantage becomes a problem. Those are, some of the obstacles that, I hope they continue to try to work out and manage better so that somebody isn't completely disadvantaged on those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting because I typically haven't really thought about them as disadvantages, and they are, but I think so much of our language in Ninja Warrior is like, it's us against the course, whatever you have to do to figure it out and just do it, like figure it out. But in this case, like if you physically can't reach something, not because you're not trying hard enough, but,
Right.
Physically incapable, like that's a different way of looking at it. And I don't think that's something I've considered before.
Yeah. And it's not very often. Like, I think a lot of the obstacles are great and don't, have that type of disadvantage. And I understand the mentality that you adjust to the course, but for me, and I don't know if, Casey worked on the spider wall or or whatever, her practice was leading up to that. But all it takes is for the national competition to move the trampoline back 1 foot, and whatever Casey practiced on with the spider wall, that 1 foot made it impossible for her. Do you know what I mean? So it's, there are some things that you do have to be careful of anatomically, not physiologically.
Yeah, I think it's something, especially for gym owners and those who build courses for our local leagues, I think it's important for them to consider as well when building courses. I know with American Ninja Warrior, we do have a group of backstage testers. I've been that person before who is there on set like days or up to a week or more earlier before the competition to test obstacles. And they do make those adjustments, but it has to kind of be an average that they then set, and it's not going to change. I think, there's very few times that I think they've brought in like a box or something for someone to stand on to reach like the beginning of an obstacle. That's like so seldom. I don't know how often that really happens.
I think it's great that they test them. I think that's really good. Again, not to, I've never been to a testing situation, but if the testers are really if they're really spanning the gap of the physical attributes of the athletes, for instance, if you have a tester that's literally 5 foot tall and an athlete that's 6'6", then the averages make sense. But if you're getting the athlete that is all very similar between 5'6" and 5'10", if that's all your testers, well, then the average is not going to help some of the athletes on the extremes. Do you know what I mean? So,
oh, for sure. I agree. And I can say that I think that they do bring in quite a variety of weights and sizes and males and females, but I hear what you're saying. I mean, the other thing is, though, that's funny is like in testing, I know there's certain obstacles that I've ran for them 4 or 5 times. But if you're the athlete competing, you only get your one shot. And so where I might be learning and adjusting literally in the testing setting, like they don't have that opportunity. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's not a perfect system, but I do think that they try really hard. But that's
for sure.
Yeah. But I think my specific focus is really like, for those of us in more of the sport of Ninja Warrior, not so much the TV show, how can we better produce our own courses for leagues and competitions in a way that makes more sense? Like, and there are a variety of competitions now that are trying to consider like, okay, are there certain aspects of obstacles that we can scale to, to gender, or can we scale it to heights and things like that? Are we allowed to like use a box if you can't reach, or like things like that? So I know in the leagues, I feel like there's a lot of these conversations happening, but I don't know what the producers like on the show think. So
yeah, and here my one last comment on this. I think when I watch it, the biggest thing that I want people to think about when they make the obstacle is what are we testing in this person? What are we trying to accomplish with this obstacle? Like, what part of the physical task are we testing? And does the obstacle make sense for that? And so like the initial steps, the really wide steps, we talked about this before, but the really wide steps, the person who is taller, those steps are the easiest obstacle that they'll ever encounter. Somebody who is smaller, they're literally jumping from step to step. And so what is the goal of those really wide steps? Like, what are you trying to accomplish for that obstacle? What is that testing? And then once you do it, does it actually test what you want it to test in terms of the obstacle? For me, those wide steps, it's like it's only a disadvantage for the smaller people who have to jump from one to the next rather than run across them like somebody else.
Yeah, no, I hear you for sure. I think also, I don't know, I'm just thinking back now to all the times I've been on set, like during filming and things. And there's definitely been times when I'm trying to remember who it was, Jennifer Tavernier. She, for whatever reason, I'm not quite sure what happened when she was doing those steps. She is a shorter athlete, and so she was doing like huge leaps from step to step, and
Right.
she came out of it with like a bloody nose. I'm not really sure how that happened,
Right.
but like that's a perfect example of someone who's literally giving that first obstacle their everything. And I think the first obstacle, I've heard other like more seasoned athletes than me, I've heard them say like, oh, the first obstacle is just, it's meant to be something pretty straightforward just to like get you comfortable like being on set. But like for some people that's not it at all. It's to make you, it's like a huge challenge.
Right. And,
So
like this year, like the first one was more of a straight on, like step
right.
and run. Like that
Mhm.
makes way more sense to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Rather than the ones that are spread out so wide that people have to jump from one to the next.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So then moving on, I'm wondering, is there a difference in the way that muscles function between males and females? Because I've another myth that we brought up, we wanted to like debunk or talk about was sometimes I've heard people say that men are more advantaged in the fast twitch movements and women are better with endurance. And is that something that's true and that's like innate, or is that like a myth?
Yeah. So this is good. There's a genetic quality to fiber typing, and it comes from your, family line, so to speak. Um, I don't think that there's any evidence to suggest that males and females are one way or another in terms of, in general, a large amount of people on Earth are 50-50. They have 50% fast twitch fibers and they have 50% slow twitch fibers. That's the vast majority of the average person. Then you get into elite athletes and you're talking about elite sprinters having, over 70% fast twitch, or elite marathon runners that have over 70% slow twitch. And again, elite female marathon runners have a really high slow twitch fiber content, and female sprinters, they have a really high fast twitch content. So I don't think there's a gender difference necessarily. I think it's just genetically each individual kind of gets their percent fast twitch, percent slow twitch from their genetic line. And so my initial read on that is that, again, historically, women didn't train, to be powerful speed. And now, really since Title IX, you're seeing a massive shift in the training of females. And so I think, you'll see that continue to grow and grow, the power and the speed of female athletes. Because the one thing you can do is you can, change certain fiber types based on training in terms of what they like to do. So we have a fast twitch A fiber, and that fast twitch A fiber, it can be somewhat aerobic, meaning long endurance, and it can be fast, speed, and powerful. And that fiber type will actually kind of shift based on your training. Your slow twitch fibers, they're going to be more endurance no matter what. The fast twitch X fibers, they're going to be more powerful and speed oriented no matter what. But that fast twitch A fiber, it can actually do both. And so the way you train is the way that fiber tends to lean. And so that's where training makes a big difference in how you're perceived as a speed or an endurance type of athlete.
That's so interesting. So then in your training, like what if you're in a sport that really switches back and forth? So I'm just thinking of ninja again, obviously, but sometimes there's you'll jump onto an obstacle that's like a really quick sprint through these moving objects, and then you get to the platform, and the next obstacle is going to be something where you're climbing through, doorknobs or something that's hanging, and you're going to be up in the air, and it's like it can be fast if you're able to move through it quickly, but if not, you're going to be hanging for a while. So how does that work then, whether in training or just in real time? How do your muscles, how do they have that ability to move back and forth? It's more so just which muscle fibers you're activating at that time.
Yeah, again, like every exercise, we're recruiting all our different fiber types. It really is those fibers' ability to do the work that it's asked to do. Now, what makes Ninja so intriguing to me is just that reason. It requires both. There is no set system involved where you're not running just a 100-meter dash and you're not just running a marathon. In the obstacle courses, there are certainly muscular endurance activities and there's certainly power activities. And so when you're training, you have to account for all of that. And I think that's kind of the enjoyment that I get from watching, is that it really takes every aspect of training and every aspect of muscle strength, every aspect of muscular endurance, even some cardio for sure, to get through all of these different obstacles, especially some that are timed. There's just differences that occur even from stage to stage, timed, untimed. So I think that's what makes it intriguing. I know it makes it difficult to train for, but it does make it very intriguing.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like Ninja always has something for everybody too. Like if you get into the sport and you enjoy it, you're going to find so many different facets of types of obstacles that it's like everyone has their certain type of thing that they love. Because my background was in school, I played volleyball and ran track and field. And so for me, I was a hurdler. And so then coming into Ninja, I loved all of the agility obstacles where I had to like quickly move through it and like know exactly where my feet were hitting and move through quickly. Like that's what I loved. And it was more so the climbing and like the intense hanging that I was like daunted by.
Right. Whereas if you have a gymnast, the gymnast would much prefer the hanging and the, those types of obstacles versus maybe some of the feet ones. So I think that makes it, and just so you know, like this is all athletes, every team sport athlete that you can think about, they have to train multiple systems. So if you have a basketball player, that basketball player has to be able to jump high and be powerful. That basketball player has to be able to sprint. That basketball player has to be able to have endurance to last the entire half or the entire quarter. And so not only do they have to train in sprinting and jumping, they also have to train their cardio to last for a long period of time. Soccer players are the same, and lacrosse players. Like a lot of these athletes, they're training all of the different aspects of strength, power, and endurance because that's what makes for the best athlete. And so I think that's where Ninja falls right in. It really requires all aspects of training to really be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing about Ninja that's just so exciting, especially to women and to girls, is like it is a form of sport that seems to unlock so many of these different abilities that to other people it seems scary, almost like you're doing a lache through the air, you're running up a wall, like all these things that can seem kind of like crazy to some people. It's so exciting to us, and I think for sure for the females it's so empowering. It feels like here we are in the course with the guys like doing everything that can seem like I don't know, I try to imagine if this was happening like 50 years ago, like I don't know, I think Ninja would look pretty different. So it's just awesome to be able to do Ninja.
Even watching Flex Lebrecht make it to the top 8 and actually directly competing against a male, I thought that was a special moment. I thought that was really cool. Unfortunately, she didn't come out on top, but she actually ended up losing to the guy who won it all. So,
yes,
I think I thought that was great. Do I think those steps were a little bit of a disadvantage for her? Probably, but.
It's so funny that you bring that up because I literally yesterday just interviewed Jess Lebrecht for the podcast. Her episode is coming out. Yeah, her episode will come out after yours, actually. The first week of December, you'll hear Jesse's interview. But I asked her that question. I said, because I'm thinking also about all these things that we talked about. And so I asked her, what did it feel like to race against him, especially looking back and then realizing like he was the winner. But she brought that up. She said, it was challenging. It was fun. Like she was so proud to be there. But the thing that she noticed was the steps. Like she had to make so many movements to get up. And she said, she glanced over and he's doing it in such like a fluid, like go, go, go. She said for her, it felt like a climb versus like for him, it was more of like a push and a leap up. And, she felt that difference.
Yeah. And a definite difference in power, I would say. But you did see some of, even like male versus male, you saw some of the, smaller competitors struggle with the steps being so high, except for the extreme powerful ones that could almost like vertical jump up to the top of them. So it was very interesting to watch. I was glued to my TV for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I believe it was Austin Gray who was able to do kind of like a Kong movement, almost like a parkour. Yeah, and that was very impressive to me.
That was crazy.
Yeah, for sure.
My guess is that if we took those 8 athletes and we measured their vertical jump, my guess is that the time up the stairs would directly correlate with vertical jump.
Wow.
That's my feeling. Because the ones that you saw had a lot of bounce, like a lot of, vertical bounce. Those were the ones that could do like almost like the parkour up the stairs, which was a huge advantage for them trying to get up those stairs.
Yeah, I feel like I want to do a science experiment now and
I know.
message all 8 of them. Yeah, I might message all 8 of them and say, hey, find a PT place where they have the vertical jump stick, because I feel like I don't even know where I'd go to find one of those.
Yeah. I wish they could all come here. We have a Vertec.
That'd be great.
That would be fun.
So thinking back to my question, we've been talking a lot about the strength to weight ratio, and there's a perfect example with Daniel Gill and Jess Lebrecht. Just wondering, we've seen so many amazing strides in women's ability, especially on Ninja Warrior, and just seeing how every season it seemed like the women's potential is greater and greater, and they're reaching higher and higher, accomplishments and what seemed like limitations before, like they're breaking those limitations. And so it's so exciting, but I'm wondering, what is there a cap, so to say, or is there like a limit for relative to the guys, like the way that we can achieve strength? Like, can we, so to say, reach the same types of elite level in our elite athletes, or is it always going to be some sort of, I don't want to say disadvantage, but just difference comparing our elite men to women?
I always start this conversation with every single person has a genetic limit. And that genetic limit obviously varies based on your history, but we all have a genetic limit. Can females reach the same level? Historically, if you look at, world record times in track and field, the men's times are faster. Now, to your point, the females, I believe, are narrowing that gap over time, but there still is a difference. There is a difference in the world record in marathon time. However, that has greatly shrunk in terms of the time difference. So I think we're getting into generations of females that are pushing the limits of what we know and what we don't know. As those times narrow and as those times get closer and closer, will it ever be the same? Only time will tell. But as of right now, the genetic limits do seem to be just slightly separated between males and females. That's not meant to discourage females. Like I said, those time gaps are closing. It's really kind of been interesting to watch over the last 20 years what has occurred. Same thing with like powerlifting numbers and different aspects of that are really quite intriguing. But it's taken a lot of time, a lot of changes in training, and a lot of shifts in how women train. And so as we continue to see that, my hope is that you continue to see those differences shrink. Whether that's true or not, only time will tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I had interviewed Dr. Dastani a few weeks back now, and something that we were talking a lot about was, the mental aspect of performance in sports and how that can play into your potential. And something that Mary and I had discussed a lot was, what we're seeing in Ninja is a lot of the young girls who have been training a Ninja Warrior now from 6 or 8 years old, and they've been doing it for like 5 years or 6 years now. We see how their abilities on the course seems to surpass like adult women and like everyone else. And, and they're younger too, but, again, the strength to weight ratio, I'm thinking about that now too.
Right.
But, we're seeing them doing so well and competing well against the boys. But we then often do see a difference when they hit puberty. And there is a more of like that gap where it seems like the boys are doing better again, but there's always like those exceptions. But we always wonder, like, if we're encouraging these younger girls to not believe that they're limited, but believe that they can see past limitations that they've seen before, and really believe that they can reach these newer and like higher levels of potential. Like, will they reach it? Or is there just a genetic difference that will haunt them forever? Or just like, be a difference that they have to realize is there. So I don't know. Yeah.
Like I said, I think it's fascinating to watch as the female trained athlete is far different than it's been historically in the past. And like I said, I believe those times are getting closer and closer and closer. And so, you don't want to discourage any females at all because, it takes time. And we just never know. And so if you want to achieve something that nobody else has, I can't tell you no. That's just not fair to all those who are trying really hard to break the barriers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, again, I wouldn't want to discourage anyone else as well. I know we've had so many conversations on the podcast with different individuals just talking about, physical differences, mental differences, all these things. And, I never want anyone to feel like it's just a waste of time to try. I want people to feel, empowered and feel like, well, why not? Why not me? Why couldn't I break one of these limitations? But at the same time, like, I have also heard those opposing stories, if you want to say, of girls who've said like, well, yeah, but now I'm 14 or whatever, and they've realized the difference now once puberty has set in, and they feel like they see a change and they don't like it, and they're like, well, how can I work out differently? Or now I don't want to work out with the boys because now I just feel slower or like weaker or whatever it is. But it's trying to, I'm constantly talking to people, trying to just get them away from the mindset of, oh, I'm just weaker now or whatever, but to focus on, what is your own ability of strength and what is your physical body capable of doing, and focus on that and not worry about comparing yourself in such a way that's going to make you feel less than. But I do think it is a delicate balance of realizing that there are physiological differences and there are, like you said, genetic limitations in some ways, but it doesn't have to be this end all be all like deciding factor that's just like set in stone from the beginning. Like, there are ways to increase your strength and to change your technique, your mindset, all these things.
That's 100% true. And I just want to throw it out there that this isn't, it shouldn't be just a gender discussion. There are many people, male and female, that get to a point where, man, can I really do this? Right? That's not just a female. That there's a lot of males out there doing the same ninja workouts saying, can I really get any better? And so, that's where I don't want to discourage anybody, male or female, because everybody's out there saying, can I get any better? Is this all that I have? And you just don't know until you put yourself through, more and more and try to figure out a new training style and, do everything that you possibly can to get better. But it shouldn't just be a gender thing. Every athlete gets to a point where we really question whether or not we're capable of doing the next step or capable of getting better. And so I think that's where the discussion should go, not just females.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. From your perspective, do you think what would you look at Ninja Warrior and think like, oh, they better be training like this? Like, what is the thing that you think ninjas probably need to focus on in training?
Yeah, so every time I watch Ninja, I always grip strength is, so vitally important to surviving some of those obstacles. And that sheerly takes a lot of practice, climbing, a lot of upper body. But at the same time, there's a lot of power movements. We just talked about one, that stair climb that they did in the finals. That's not a grip strength thing. That is a complete power move. Being able to bounce that high onto each stair, that power move becomes super important. And so, it's a plyometric based training once you've gained enough strength in order to do that. And that grip strength in hanging, all the different types of holds, I think that's where maybe some people miss. They hang in one position all the time, or you hang from a bar. But in Ninja, there literally are so many different things that you have to try to hold on to. The worst one I ever saw was a few years back when they were in the third stage of the finals, and they had to jump onto different size balls that were hanging, and they had to somehow use both hands to grab around the ball. How miserable is that? You don't ever practice grabbing onto a ball while flying through the air. That doesn't take just hanging from a bar. That takes way more than that. And so different ways to grip climbing walls, and different ways that you can hang from this 2 fingers or this 3 fingers, or all of those different advantages that you could get just from changing your grip and hanging for a while rather than constantly the standard. The other one from this year was the one where they had to grab onto handles, and the first 2 were the handles were forward, and then the last one you flew to the final one, and the grips were actually reversed, so you had to grab it with your hands facing your face. Mm-hmm. How difficult is that? It's maybe something that you probably never even thought to practice, and so it gave a lot of people a really hard time, and a lot of people fell on that because it was so unusual to try to totally switch how you swing and hang from that one obstacle.
Yeah, of course. It's great advice. But it's true. A lot of times on the show, they'll throw out these new obstacles that no one's seen before. And if you're backstage, in the ninja holding area, it's this mass discussion of all right, well, this and the, just talking about what that would feel like and what it's going to be like to attempt that type of an obstacle. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And then you might not know this, but, we always, after the A&W competitions and everything, people always, as soon as they get back to their home gyms, they're building replicas of everything they experienced on the show.
Right.
And so, yeah. So it's the first time that backwards, reverse grab came up actually was last year in Angry Birds. It was one of the obstacles in Baltimore where it was a bunch of those types of different grabs that on your side or in front of you were inverted grab type thing. And that was so hard. And so many people fell there. And again, this year, like you said, so many people fell there as well, because if your gym doesn't have it, you probably haven't tried it. And it's a blind grab. So, yeah.
I know. And then the other one was the new one, the corkscrew one, where you like...
yeah.
That
was aggressive.
You grabbed onto it and it spun you, and then...
Yep.
I mean, how do you train for that? That is just like, really crazy. And that's why I say, like, if you can make up grip strength type of exercises just so like one finger is holding you up, I mean, that's what it seems like it's becoming. It's like, if you can hold yourself up with two fingers, you have an advantage type of scenario.
Oh, man. Don't give him any ideas. I don't want to hold myself up.
I mean, I remember watching for the first time and thinking that I'm going to drop the name now. The one where you had to fly onto the little planks, like in the third stage. And now people do it easily all the time.
Like the flying bar? It could be the flying bar, yeah.
It was, oh man. I forget it. It's not the flying bar, because you're on like a side wall that just has like an 1.5 inch thick piece of wood to hold on to, and then you have to fly from one wall to the next and land on this.
Oh, yes. Yeah. The cliffhangers. They're
the cliffhanger. That's what it is.
Yes. Yeah.
And the first time I saw that, I'm like, well, that's impossible. And then now everybody does a cliffhanger.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. It's like the ninja adapting. I think that's the mentality that so many ninjas have. It's like, you have to just figure it out and adapt. Like, that's what ninja is.
Right. And I think it's really cool. I guess that's why I'm intrigued by it, for sure.
Well, you'll have to find yourself at a ninja gym someday soon so you could try out these things for yourself.
Yeah. I would probably be scared to even try the warped wall. I feel like I would just completely fall backwards and hurt myself. So.
Oh, man. Well, that's why before you start, they always give you the how to fall class. So.
Oh, yeah. That's a good idea. That's a very good idea. I would have to work on my foot speed quite a bit to get up the wall. That's what I know. I'd have to really, work on my downhill running.
There you go.
I know people are like, what are you talking about?
Oh, yeah. So much of the
downhill running, when you're out of control, like down in a sand dune. I grew up in Michigan, and so we had massive sand dunes. And when you tried to run down a sand dune and your body is falling over your feet and your feet are trying to keep up.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, though. In the ninja gyms, we say never do that, because we teach people, when you run up the warp wall, you don't turn around. You just slide down on your stomach.
Right.
So that's like a rule. We've had so many people who've like broken ankles or whatever because they try to do the turn around and run. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty
that
scary
hurts.
stuff. Yeah.
I bet.
All right.
Crazy.
Well, yeah. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate all your knowledge and sharing with us.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on. So I would encourage all ninja athletes, to push your limits. The courses are changing, and so there's all different aspects that you can get better at. I tell my class, they always ask me, how do you know if you reach your genetic limit? And I say, well, put it this way, I bet you 99% of America hasn't reached their genetic limit. So always keep that in mind. You really can do more than probably what you sometimes think you can.
That's awesome. I love that. That's such an amazing picture in my mind. I'm envisioning every ninja out there just being like, I have to go hang for longer. There's more I can do. and ninjas don't sit still. So you just gave them the go ahead to like go crazy. So thank you.
Yeah. Maybe that's not the best message, but
no, I think that's great. But seriously, thank you so much. And it's been great talking to you.
It's nice to meet you also, and good luck.
Thank you.